Association agreement between Ukraine and the EU, together with the addendums. That's 2,000 pages, but she translated, together with the experts and journalists, that into understandable language. So you can find this infographic in a concentrated way, and you will learn what this agreement is, and you will understand what problems, what difficulties we will have to tackle. And I would like to introduce our guests. These are people who put a lot of efforts during the whole history of independent Ukraine into us achieving that day, 27th of June 2014. Roman Shpek, who was the Minister of Economy of Ukraine back in 1993-95, was the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine in 95-96, and the head of the Representative Office of Ukraine at the European Union from 2000 till 2007. Yuri Yekhanurov, the Prime Minister of Ukraine in 2005-2006, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Economy back in 97. And Taras Kachka, also very interesting personality, the person who was really writing this text of the association agreement. And he's a very good expert, not just on European documents agreements, but also on the Eastern documents. If you have any questions about the customs union, Taras will tell you everything. And we have this basket here that symbolizes today's day, what we are signing today, because part of the agreement, political part, was signed earlier. And I would like to ask Lyubov Vakulenko, why do we have this basket, why these products, and why we decided to illustrate signing of the agreement this way. Good afternoon, dear guest journalists, dear colleagues. Why we put this basket here? We put only the dairy and meat products of Ukraine, which unfortunately cannot get to the European market because signing is signing, but Ukraine has to do a lot of home tasks here and now. If next week we do not sign important laws on safety of products, this basket will stay here for many months. And this way we were trying to show you that these products could correspond to European standards, but because in Ukraine we are not moving towards that, it will not get to the market of European Union. It all depends on us. And now I would like to move to our brief presentation. Now, when in 20 minutes the procedure of signing of agreement will start, we do not want to talk about how beneficial it is. Also, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Gryska, joined us in 2007 to 2009. Mr. Gryska was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. I do not want to talk about advantages because the speakers will be talking about that. We would like to believe that signing of the agreement is the fact that will take place in 20 minutes. I would like to draw your attention to the critical red points. There are 5 of them with which we will have to work during the first year of execution of agreement. We are signing the free trade zone. The first red point is customs. Our maximum task is sorry, we cannot hear the comments. Our first point is customs. The first day when the agreement becomes effective, our customs should work as European, without bribes. What do we have now? Our second red point is food products. For our food products to get to the European market, we have to pass many important laws which will change Soviet-type system to European-type system, and it depends on us whether we succeed in it or not. The next critical point is standardization in industry. Ukraine has started some movement here, but the problem is we will have to adapt 3,000 European standards. We have adapted about 800. How this will be happening further depends on the authorities and our pressure. The next point is the fact that Anti-Monopoly Committee in 2013 went crazy. It imposes huge fines. For European Union, that's normal, but there should be clear criteria and the procedure, and we do not have that. The European Union requires that the Anti-Monopoly Committee should pass the rules of transparent imposing of fines. And the last red point, I would like to mention that is that we need to create the body which will be monitoring and coordinating the process of implementation of the agreement. Now we have the consultations with the experts, negotiations, but there's no result. After such brief presentation, I believe that we can continue what Lyubov mentioned, what needs to be done now for the agreement to be implemented, because the document itself will not move itself, and I would request you to limit yourselves to the following time frame, because the ministers were the members of parliament. I wasn't the member of parliament, but you were in the parliament, you visited the parliament, you have an understanding of what time frame is, 1-2 minutes, because we have many questions, the journalists have many questions. Besides, we are following the broadcast and we'll be watching the ceremonial moment of signing. What needs to be done now? If you maybe have some other ideas, maybe you would like to share your memories about what were you doing in the 90s, what were the very first steps of European integration. Please, the first one will be Yuri Yekhanurov. The microphone, Yuri Ivanovich.
Thank you. You are right. It's extremely pleasant and very responsible day for the country when Ukraine is now doing the first step towards the integration of Ukrainian economy to the internal market of the European countries. When we have started preparation to the association agreement signing, we had many discussions. What will it mean for Ukraine? And immediately we started thinking about more profound thing, how to integrate our economy to the European, where we can gain quick successes. I've read the list of European standards of 800 standards which we adapted to our economy, while Russia has adapted more than 2,000 standards as part much more standards as part of Russian and legislation, and this immediately gave her huge competitive advantages. The country's economy cannot develop and cannot be competitive just in several local markets. It should be competitive in much broader environment. In your presentation, we saw issue number 5 related to the local authorities and the institutional capacities of the government bodies. In many discussions, we mentioned that we have to comply with a lot of criteria of Ukraine's participation in the EU, adaptation of legislation, standards, etc. These are so-called Copenhagen criteria. And below this criteria, there is a specific remark about institutional capacities. It says that the authorities of the applicant country should be able to carry out the tasks put upon it by the society, and actually it means that when it comes to the compliance with the WTO rules, with the bilingual bilateral treatments with Russian Federation, or the association agreement implementation, the biggest threat of non-implementation is in the Ukrainian authorities, and Ukrainian society has to put put task to the government, put aside all your disputes, and start to implement the agreement to be able to do the responsibility which is put upon you by the society. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Yuri Yakhanurov, who was the Prime Minister in '97. I used to be Deputy Minister of Economy when Mr. Shpek was Minister of Economy. I would like to continue what Mr. Shpek started to discuss and describe that it is very important to translate the language of the agreement into the language understandable for Ukrainian bureaucrats. There are the most important things which we should keep in mind here. We should immediately represent the membership of all our governmental bodies. That is to eliminate and eradicate the quota principle for the personnel formation and the quota principle in appointing candidates to the positions. If actually, within 2 weeks or at least the months, all the bureaucrats have to sign down the personal letters that they are not members to any political party. This is extremely important. That is, they are impartial. The second is that they have to pass special retraining, and we should change the training of civil servants. Also, we have to think carefully about the reform of self-government. We have a good example of Poland. They have a very good administrative unit. They have gminas, and these gminas are rather rich. And if you compare Polish gminas with neighboring district radas in Lviv Oblast, you will immediately understand the difference in richness, because in Lviv Oblast, when people leave their homes in Lviv Oblast and go to earn money to Kiev, they pay taxes in Kiev instead of paying taxes in their native villages, small towns, and it is a huge work. It requires a huge efforts to transfer this paid tax from Kiev to Lviv Oblast. And without doing this, we will be unable to raise the economy of Lviv Oblast. So the association agreement is not about the easiness to go to the European Union. It suggests that we have to do a lot of work, which sometimes will not be very pleasant.
The question is to Volodymyr Hryska, what would be the best way to organize this type of a work, which is not pleasant, according to Mr. Yekhanurov? What should be the coordination? Should that be done by the Vice Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs? Thank you again. I'm sorry for being somewhat delayed because of the traffic jams. But on the way here, I was listening to one of our radio stations, and there was a discussion going on about how will we be selling our goods to European Union. And the correspondent is asking the expert, how will they understand that this is the Ukrainian good that is to be bought? I remembered my diplomatic work in Vienna when I was the ambassador there, and we were promoting back then the Schuster vodka on the shelves of Austrian shops. How we were doing it? That is an honest story. Guys from Odessa came. They brought a lot of Ukrainian vodka, and that vodka was in some of the stores given free of charge. They were organizing some tasting there, and with that some Ukrainian salo and other things, and then they put this vodka on shelves together to other goods, and it started living its European life. Why I am telling it to you, everything great starts from a small thing, and if we start doing it systemically, well organized, then I'm sure that Ukrainian goods will find their place on the shelves of European stores. Let's not create a monster of association agreement which will ruin the Ukrainian economy. If we have a competitive products, we have all the chances to get to the market. If we don't have these products, there's nothing to talk about. We need to make these products competitive. Natalia requested to tell some stories. Well, 1 second more. I just recollect 2008, September, the summit Ukraine, EU in Paris. Yushchenko and Sarkozy signed the document that we start working on the association agreement. 6 years later, the agreement is ready. I believe we spent a lot of time, but now, and the colleague, I do support my colleague who said how this should be done. Also, in September last year, at the moment when the previous authorities were preparing the signing, many European colleagues were asking me, will you be executing it? And the main question, how will you be executing it? And all our Western neighbors say, set up a state body, that's the must, that will be responsible for European integration, not formal and not just department in the cabinet of ministers, but the body which will be under the prime minister, that will be influencing the situation. And I believe that only the setting up of a powerful body, like it was in Poland, in Slovak Republic, only such a body will be able to influence the coordination of these efforts, because Ministry of Foreign Affairs is just a small part of what we need to do. And it is but we need to cover agriculture, energy sector, and trade, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will not be able to do that. So otherwise, I believe we will not be able to do anything. And what is also important, that's probably not diplomatic, but I believe that we need to have from European Union the whole army of supervisors. They are called advisors now, quite delicately, but basically in every agency we need to have several people who will be there controlling every euro that comes to Ukraine and that is spent here for euro integration. If this doesn't happen, then all the things you're talking about, the corruption which is everywhere, this will be a monkey business. And the last thing, to comment on what Yuri Ivanovich said with Mr. Yekhanurov about civil servants, I do support that, but we need to do so that civil servants are protected, so that authorities do not have to clean up all the state apparatus and then start forming its own. Otherwise, we will not have this institutional memory that the state apparatus needs, because otherwise the state will not be able to exist normally, to function normally. Mr. Speck, in the agreement provides for institutions for further actions. Agreement, just like the previous agreement, provides for Ukraine to continue political dialogue, and this political dialogue on behalf of our country will be conducted by the president. There are joint organs developed, the council and the committee. The Ukrainian part of the council was always headed by the prime minister. All members of the government are the members of the council. Not a single deputy minister on European integration will be able to do anything. That's responsibility of the ministry and the minister. And the prime minister, once a month, besides having meetings of the government, has to have the meetings of the Ukrainian part of the council and ask the minister, and every minister will have a deputy on European integration, or maybe a person responsible for something else. They will find people who have to organize the process. The council should have committee, a Ukrainian part of the committee as a working body, and depending on the priorities of implementation of the agreement, it could be from 4 to 8 subcommittees, and such subcommittees will be headed by the deputies, first deputies, ministers, depending on what we are doing, how serious the issue is. And the Ukrainian part of the committee could be headed by the either vice prime minister or the minister on European integration, and he has to coordinate all the work on financial and technical assistance. But if we have some joint bodies which are inactive, and we set up our own autonomous internal body, and that is the first thing that the European Union will not understand, why in the agreement provides for joint bodies, but we do not use them properly. The place for experts who will be helping in ministries and agencies is of importance, but also it is important to understand that we, our civil servants, the civil servants of tomorrow, after signing the agreement, we have to start to learn how to think and act like European civil servants. They have to step away from populism. They should stop loving us for our money. They should be honest and responsible for their actions or for their lack of actions, because sometimes the decision not passed has more negative effect than some wrong decision. The first slide mentioned the customs. Once when I was working in Brussels, I could not understand the volumes of trade between Ukraine and the EU. I have analyzed the statistics of the Eurostat. I analyzed the statistical data from the State Statistical Committee of Ukraine, and I saw the deviation from 1 billion to 2 billion. Last year, there were such calculations made in the government, and the difference was 3.5 billion. That is basically the volume of gray turnover, non-paid customs, duties, taxes, non-paid legal salaries in Ukraine. That all requires reforming. The state cannot get integrated via a free trade zone to European Union if 50% of the economy of the state is in the shadow. These are the decisions which are to be addressed both to the government and the citizens. The taxes are to be paid, the accounts are to be also paid, and we need to start with salaries. The state has to not to delay paying the salaries, return the VAT. The payment discipline will become the basis for decisions and for forming transparent and understandable budget. The state, under the agreement, has to learn how to regulate, how to govern, but not to rule. The Prime Minister should not be a big director. He should develop and implement the policy, and that should be done so that businesses can define their priorities and the ways for development of the economy. And I would give the floor to one of the authors of the text of association agreement, Taras Kachka, who's now the head of American Chamber of Commerce. What should be done in Ukraine? How does business look at what the government, the president, should do to implement the agreement, association agreement?
First of all, I would like to say that Ukrainian economy has showed its interest to the market of the European Union for 2 months already. We have been trading with the EU without any taxes and customs fees, that is duty-free. And during these 2 months, many enterprises in many sectors very actively use these preferences, and unfortunately, in some sectors, some quotas remain under implemented, like sugar, like some other sectors. But this quota regime, this privileged regime, was established for those Ukrainian enterprises who can enter European market even before signing the DCFTA. Actually, the main objective here was not to make impediments for business development. And actually, in that basket, which you saw today, there were products of a producer which fully complies with European standards, and the only standard which they cannot comply with is that in Ukrainian sanitary standards they cannot ensure proper European sanitary control because of Ukrainian system. This brings us to the issue that our system of control is designed in a way that it not only does not protect the internal market, but it is not ready to enter and integrate into the external markets. And this should be kept in mind when we want to implement the agreement. As for the governmental bodies, probably you all are bored with the topic of sanitary and phytosanitary standards, but we have this problem. Also, our Meteor Center has to change the standards, how they measure the movements of the air, because this lays the standard for some agricultural products, and to reach, this is necessary to reach the European standard of the air clearness. Ukrainian Hydrometeor Center measures the harmful emissions in the air 4 times a day, but it has to measure it continuously all the time. The problem is that not in the air, whether it is clean or not clean, but the agreement itself is aiming at the formation of the government bodies and institutional capacities of government bodies during first 5 years of its implementation. And one of the objectives of Ukrainian delegation during negotiations was to make this burden lighter, easier, and thus Ukraine has to bring the air quality control, water control, etc., to the European standards, and later at the next stage, based on this cleaner environment, we will tackle the problem from our manufacturer's point of view. What is one of the achievements during these last 5 years? Actually, now we are more prepared to the agreement implementation. In each governmental body, we now have a team which is familiar with the agreement and knows how to implement it. Also, we have invited the army of advisors, army of supervisors to each ministry, and we have prepared space for them. Actually, in each ministry, in each agency, they will now have those bureaucrats who participated in the negotiations. They know the specificities of Ukraine. They know the specificities of our bureaucrats, and during negotiations for us it was very important to show that Ukrainian economy and even Ukrainian bureaucrats were so obsolete, so outdated and negligent, actually. But when it came to the
Very often we correspond to the requirements by 70–80%, but there is a group of persons who can monitor more or less and follow and give advice what should be changed in Ukraine, so that Ukraine makes this last but very important step towards transformation and to becoming the European state. These are the general remarks. And before we followed the broadcasting, there was some sort of a traffic jam near the entrance to the building where this EU summit will take place. Lyubova Kulinka has questions now to our guests, and then the questions of the journalists. The question to the speakers. Before, unfortunately, we hear, they introduce at the territory of the customs union, HAS is the European System of Control over Safety. We need to introduce it, and Russia is introducing it on the territory of the customs union, as well as Belarus and Kazakhstan from 2015. These requirements will become mandatory for all those who come to the market of the customs union. Also in September, Russia signed the ROS standard, and our neighbor is very smart. They want to move to European standards quietly. How will agreement help us in relations with Russia in the future? 1 minute. Volodymyr. Thank you. talking about smartness, well, I would not characterize the policy of the country aggressor so delicately, but talking about them always trying to put some obstacles to us, that is a proven fact. Just remember how Ukraine and Russia were preparing to WTO when they were putting obstacles to us to dictate conditions later. Only our tolerant and delicate attitude does not help us. They are doing it diplomatically, but that is monkey business, because today's event, which will take place in a few minutes, will summarize all that post-Soviet past, and that's the main result of today's event. And whatever Russia's doing, the cord will be broken. Roman, I wouldn't say that's too smart. They are just pragmatic. They have been working with the European Union more seriously than Ukraine. They have been working on industrial cooperation, scientific research, more systemic than our state. And that I said that 10 years ago they adapted as many standards as we now. They have never had an objective to conduct a political dialogue which allows them to talk about membership, because Russia does not join the unions. It creates unions, not the best ones, the customs unions, the Euro-Asian unions, but they were moving this way. The problem of our authorities is that we were too much loyal to the idea of verbal statements as to membership, but actually the work of Ukrainian part of the committee on executing the previous agreement allowed us to get prepared, to standardize, to identify our exporters. But we have always been waiting for the manna, and we believe that the signature under agreement, that's a miracle. And the miracle happens only in the circus, and the circus has left. And we are responsible for ourselves, for our future. We have a big chance. When in Thessaloniki they were summing up the results of the first wave of enlargement of EU, it has been mentioned in presence of 10 new members that signing of the agreement, the perspective that was rendered was the best incentive for institutional economic reforms. Nothing will happen on its own. Nothing will appear on its own, but only if we work very hard on implementing the provisions of the agreement. And it is very important that now, after everyone applauds, they will be drinking champagne. We will not. Here we'll be drinking milk. But we need to demand from those who we elect, to those who we elected appoint. We need to demand them to execute the provisions of the agreement. The populism ruins us. Look at what marginal parliamentarians are doing. What mess of populist laws. They ignored this society for years, and now they decided to fall in love with it. At the expense of who? At the expense of the state, the banking system. We need to learn how to think and act in European way, and that will allow us to progress. And if we live according to socialist measures with the ideology which is at the genetic level, at the level of subconsciousness, if we think that European agreement will save us and then in time accumulate energy to say how we suffered from this agreement signed, we suffer because decisions are not made and because the reforms are delayed. Thank you, Yuri. I continue supporting that. We need to talk less, do more. I would like to remind you how Russia was criticizing us for our work with NATO. We were not working, actually. We were just talking, and they were working. We were working in 4 committees, and they in 8 committees. And all the time there was work going on, and we were lagging behind. And here, dear colleagues, that's the issue of information policy, that's the issue of the will of our state, of our society. Just look, the same topic. In 2008, in Krishchatik, they showed Kozak, this armored vehicle, where the vehicles with special type of vehicles. Next year, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation went to Italy and purchased these, now they call them Bars and Ris, and they, together with the NATO country, start manufacturing the products which are now in Crimea, and now you can see them in the east. So basically, we need to be rational, pragmatic, and those who love to talk, well, Ukrainian people should understand that in 2007 I was traveling all over Ukraine in universities. I was lecturing about why I am against populism. But if you are against populism, you're not needed, because such great guys and girls who they're great, who will tell how great you are, how Ukrainian nation is great. Just vote for me and everything will be great. But all those requirements, bureaucratic requirements, these Brussels bureaucrats, they just hamper. But otherwise everything will be great. In the end, the Scotch whiskey is a normal Scotch moonshine. Just look, just think, when will Ukrainian moonshine achieve the level of Scotch whiskey? The word is yours, Taras. I believe in the morning it's great to talk about champagne, whiskey, and moonshine. There will be no champagne. Tell us when. In 10 years after the agreement gets effective. But we will be the last country on the territory of the Soviet Union that will refuse from the name champagne. Georgia and Moldova have done that. They signed this agreement long ago. And Russian producers of champagne, there are such, they voluntarily refuse from that name in the agreement between the producers, between the sectors. Intersectoral agreements will be the last ones who will be using the term champagne in the world, besides Americans in the domestic market. But that is about Ukrainian luck. Well, we are so lazy. To what extent you should be lazy? But the main problem is that Ukrainian entrepreneurs are ready to trade everywhere. We trade with 180 countries of the world, not just with Russia and European Union. And irrespective of how events develop, we'll be trading with the former Soviet Union republics. Another thing is that the policy of the customs union is directed towards another tectonic split between the CIS. Within the CIS, we were so happy that there's a free trade regime in the CIS, but today even Georgia didn't stop this regime, but now European Union applying European standards for its system of technical regulations, developing according to the global trend, just like Ukraine politically is building a wall or is threatening to build a wall between Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Armenia, and Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Basically, it will probably mean something, but probably this meaning will be negative for Belarus, Kazakhstan and Russia, because the whole world opens up for the trade and the trade becomes global. But on the other hand, the natural interest of Belarus, Kazakh companies and Russian companies to trade with Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia will win over any political motives in the trade policy of Russia. When this happens, we do not know, but even today we see that even the tone of statements of Russian Federation about the customs union, the association changes. It becomes more rational. There are still threats, but the way how the threats are worded means that we will have a long, complicated and painful dialogue, not just about safety, security, but about the trade as well. But there might be the situation when Ukrainian producers who are used to export their products to Russian Federation, they may find some other markets, not just the market of European Union, but the Middle East, the Asia, all over the world. And then we will have less and less cultural, economic, and other ties with the former Soviet Union, which is not the interest of all those countries. But that is strategic tasks. Practically, it looks very simple. On the 11th of July, there will be trilateral consultations, EU, Ukraine, Russian Federation, where again and again, EU and Ukraine will explain that the association agreement does not have any risks for bilateral trade between Ukraine and Russian Federation. The only risk in this trade is unpredictability of Russian controlling bodies. Yesterday, the Minister of Agrarian Policy said that the trade of agrarian products with Russian Federation reduced by 30% in the last 5 months, and that's because of the unilateral actions of Russian Agricultural Supervisory Authority. There are no threats from Ukraine or European Union. We need to remember the story that in case with Serbia, Russia had no problems. Serbia had similar agreement with the EU like Ukraine, and they continue to trade with Russia. There are many examples. It is very important to very pragmatically explain that we can be friends and trade beneficially with everyone. Mr. Speck would like to add, we talk a lot about export, but export is knowledge about markets, and that means a lot of work united around such a thing as marketing. But the state, which has intentions to help development of export, has to ensure certain infrastructure, appropriate infrastructure, export-import bank, pre-export crediting, credit export agencies, insurance agencies. And in Ukraine, we don't have these things. Our export-import bank is the main one that was filling in money into the statutory fund of NAK Naftogaz, who was buying the bonds to finance the budget deficit. We are not giving loans to the buyers of Ukrainian products. And look at how French work, how Italians work via such agency, Germans via KfW, and other structures, Hermes and others. That's the element of the state policy, and we need to understand and to formulate our requests or to the authorities that the export from farmers, however able it is, or from the producer, we want to sell a vessel or some other products for prepayment. But in the world, no one buys such things for cash. They buy for credit. And Ukrainian Export-Import Bank, instead of developing the export, instead of stimulating, started developing the crediting. the name Export-Import Bank, and one of the directions of activities is retail crediting. So all these good intentions on the implementation of the policy and development of the export, we need to tie up to the development of market infrastructure. Thank you. Thank you. The questions from journalists, but be ready, everyone, that any moment we will interrupt. The microphone is not used, I'm sorry. The translation is impossible.
Скажіть, якщо можна по пунктах, що ми можемо туди продавати, що можемо, а що не. Попереду в нас велика і серйозна робота. От ви уточнили всі за апарат державного управління. От що ще нам треба зробити? От адаптувати стандарти там до європейської економіки, промисловість. Скільки це буде коштувати, хто за це платитиме? Ну, в кінці кінців є там якась у нас
The microphone is not used and the translation is impossible, sorry.
підприємча система. За які гроші? Ну, от адекватно розуміти.
Давайте на цьому зупинимося.
Okay, let's stop here. There are other colleagues. Somehow the discussion is always around agrarian products, agricultural products, but we can sell everything to European Union. There's not a single product that we cannot sell. The agreement liberalizes trade of any goods starting from 23rd of April. There are no duties for industrial products, and we sell a lot. Traditional machine building, chemical, textile sector selling. Now we observe actually the element of partial reorientation in the market in the markets of European Union. We did not have goods that we were not selling, and now we will start selling, with the exception of goods. That's the only good that we were not selling to EU, and now we'll be able to sell. We sell practically all the industrial products, depending on which countries, into which countries. But now the situation is very interesting with textile. Group 6063, we have many famous brands which are made in Ukraine and are sold in EU. But those factories which are not involved into the global process, for them signing the association agreement has become like opening the eyes. We need to go to Italy and look for orders. For industrial products, this agreement is an additional signal that we need to work in this market as well. And there are many examples like that, but we trade everything. Now talking about standards, it's the most important. Very often we do not understand what it is all about. We do not understand what it is about. Why do we not understand? It's because Ukrainian products correspond to world standards. This is the issue of all the accompanying documents. What type of documents? How is it checked whether it corresponds to the standards? Very often, if we introduce European standards, we'll find out that 90% of our products correspond to these standards. The products signed, produced in the factories and plants which were modernized, these plants were built according to international standards. If they were constructed 10, 15 years ago, the biggest problem for us, it will be most expensive for those companies which are actually dying. There are many companies where there is an owner who gets cash, who buys Range Rovers, but does not invest into modernization. But the question is, should the state take care of such non-responsible owners? The responsible owners invested into modernization. You can go to Kremenchuk, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, and you will see plenty of industrial facilities which are up to date. The state wasn't investing I'm sorry, for agriculture, like the pig raising, we always say that everything's done in the private farms, and the state does not give incentives for the development of large farms. But without the state, we have dozens of the farms which are equipped with modern equipment and are ready to trade all over the world. And that's true about many other sectors of economy. There are many examples. Our economic geography of Ukraine has significantly changed in the last 15 years, and we need to get oriented looking at the new companies, the ones that have been modernized, to continue what Taras said. In Ukraine, during 20 years, more than 40% of companies, of businesses are profit-losing. The names may change, but the total volume is like that. That is wrong, and because business is working, the money is taken, but the taxes are not paid. I work in a private bank. For more than 3 years, looking at the website of the bank, you could see who are the owners of the business. Can I go to the website of your publication and see who's the owner of your publication? What I mean, openness of business is the main European requirement. Microphone is not used.
Тобто я вірю офіційному. Так от, оті люди, які є власниками,
Those people who are owners, they should invest so that their companies operate efficiently. If, on the other hand, anti-monopoly committee or other bodies, tax bodies, they should be more demanding. If the company is not competitive, it cannot stay for 20 years in the market being profit-losing. Don't take money out of the business, don't build stadiums, but invest into manufacturing facilities, get ready to new challenges, invest into economy. Do not export your money. Don't sell the products of metallurgical or chemical industries very cheaply so that you accumulate money there. Today, the industrial capacities were not renewed. The system allowed to operate all the capacities, but what's related to investment climate, openness of business will lead to the fact that owners who are on the website, those who will be there, they will have to be responsible for business. They will have to invest. I lived almost 8 years in Belgium. Every year, minimum 10% of restaurants were going bankrupt. But I have never seen that the restaurant would be closed. The owner would be changed, the menu would be changed, but people were still working. The services were rendered. That's not a tragedy. If someone cannot manage its own property, then you have to find an efficient owner. I don't have any claims here. I just say that openness of business will mean that the owners are responsible for their business. What we managed to achieve is create the platforms, the sites for money laundering. Here the business and authorities were united. That's unique situation in the world. I just want to say that in Ukraine we have not approved the law on transparency of media ownership. Who's the real owner of Visti, of Channel 112? That's a big problem. If you have anything to add, well, no. Or maybe let's take the next question. Please speak into the microphone. And that is the president of Georgia who's speaking. He sat next to Petro Poroshenko. I will ask another question. Are there any calculations in figures of canceling the duty, how much Ukrainian exporters will save on that? And also to Roman Špek, you mentioned the trade turnover. Can you also mention this trade turnover with European Union and Russia? What is the structure of it? What will change after signing the association agreement? Are there any goods in which European market needs, and then Ukraine can supply that?
About calculations, we have calculations. This is 470 million euros annually, or 450 million euros annually. But you should understand that this is not. It contains an arrow inside it. These are those taxes or tariffs which will not be paid by Ukrainian producers, but the poultry producers or those who actively trade with the EU, they won't save 30 euro per each bird, but or per 100 kilos, but they will earn money. And actually these calculations, they are demonstrative, but actually they do not reflect the actual effect of the agreement. As for the effect of the agreement, there are standard methodologies to assess the success. Actually, the access to EU or economic integration within 4 or 5 years raises GDP of the country by 5%. I think I saw the most optimistic forecast of 10-12% of GDP, but if you look at Poland, Hungary, other Eastern European, Central European countries, we see 4 or 5% of GDP annually. Unfortunately, to 2013 cannot be taken as the reference year because the net debt was huge. That's why in absolute figures, the trade turnover both with Russia, with the EU, will be not considerable, but the relative figures will be considerable. During the last 10 years, the part of Ukrainian trade in the trade of the EU, Russia, and the rest of the world split at between the level of 30%. It fluctuated in percentage dependently on the gas prices in the contracts. It fluctuated from 25 to 32%, but up to 60% of the external trade of Ukraine is to the EU and countries and Russia. The next countries is Turkey, China, the Middle East, Africa. Very negligent amounts of trade are with the EU and Latin America. But what is important for us, these are traditional export goods. These are grains, metals, and chemical products. We are very, very outdated and lagging behind in implementation of our structural reforms. And again, here we come to the issue: who are owners of those businesses, and whether the government creates favorable conditions for the export, like creating good bank conditions and good export policy. Of course, the EU trade has good prospects for growth, but we should try not just to enlarge our trade with the EU, but we should try to make the growth, to turn the growth of competitiveness into the factor of the sustainable growth for the economy. That is, that products which could be exported to the EU could be sold to African, Asian, etc. markets. Also, those products will be able to preserve its position, its leading positions in the markets of Russia, because they are really worth this. They comply with better standards, and this may result in the growth of economy and not only in the growth of export. Unfortunately, after today's signing of the agreement, we will again experience difficulties in relations with Russia, and they will create all possible sanitary and phytosanitary barriers and use any formal pretexts to hinder Ukrainian export to Russia. And we will need to think about substitution of Russian market with other Asian markets as much as possible. And I would advise you to attack the Minister of Economy and to discuss the position of our products, and we have to keep in mind the problems with Crimea, with the Donbass. That is, the country, the state itself has to develop comprehensive approach. And in developing this comprehensive approach, the Minister of Economy should play a leading role to prevent in the future any play with figures. Because in the future, we will anyway get some figures of indicators, but the ministry should be ready to interpret those figures in the future. As for our relations with Russia, the recent history of these relations shows that we cannot target 30% of our export to the country, which is unpredictable, because this constitutes the threat for Ukrainian security and for Ukrainian economy. That's why I think that the government has to set a clear target for the foreign ministry and for the Economic and Trade Ministry, that they should look for new markets in Asia, in Africa, everywhere. The country cannot be 100% dependent on one energy source. In Europe, there are now many countries who are dependent on Russia's gas. And what is their policy? This demonstrates that the policy of the country is very much dependent on the energy suppliers' policy. So today we have to undertake the correction of our so-called brotherly relations and reorient our policy towards the European Union. Now we can see that Georgia's president has finished his speech, and now we have Moldovan president. My question is to Mr. Roman Shpek. You described that export and import crediting is necessary. Whether we can expect any steps from the government aimed at decreasing the interest rates by NBU, taking in account that we have the saving regime. And the second question, whether do you expect to have any mechanism which would allow Ukrainian oligarchs to bring their money, earned money back to Ukraine? And the second question to Taras Kachka, whether we will be able soon to see European goods on Ukrainian shelves. Back in 1996, I resigned from the diplomatic service, and I cannot be responsible for the activities of the government now, but I would expect from them the steps which you just described. This is not the interest rate of NBU which is important here. What is important here, this is economic policy or export policy which is related to the structural reforms in the banking sector and sanitation of the banking sector. Ukrainian needs banks, including small size and medium size, but it needs healthy banks. And I believe that new rules will allow to find those banks which have sufficient amount of capitals, and the plans will be developed for bank additional capitalization and ensure provision of sufficient reserves for the banks, which will allow further development of economy. Today, the parliament, the government, the taxation agency sees not as the blood of the economy, but actually they see them like the ancient doctors who have to rescue the economy. As for the newly signed appointments, the IMF agreement and other agreements will allow to form the base of sustainable growth for the country. It is, and mutual trust is needed, and owner should be able to protect his right in the court. He should pay for wrong or right decision. Corruption should be eradicated. Transparency of power should be establishment, and then capitals will come to Ukraine, outflow from Ukraine, and the amnesty itself won't be.
It was not, but the pen is the same, demonstrating historic events are unavoidable. The documents that we will sign today is not just political and economic. It is a symbol of faith and of unbreakable will. It is a tribute to people who gave their lives and health to make this moment happen. And it is the strongest reminder what today's Europe is and must be about. People's determination to live in a better, fairer world. With this in mind, I congratulate each and every one of us. It took Ukraine 7 long years to walk the thorny road towards the political association and economic integration with the European Union. This road saw its ups and downs, but today we are finally here. All Ukraine, including Crimea, starting to be a member of association agreement with the European Union. Dear friends, United Europe is in all nation interest. Yet this doesn't mean that it has no opponents. There have been many efforts to undermine the European unification project, like they did in Ukraine throughout last months. with Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, lining up with the EU economically, a lot is at stake. First and foremost, the success of freedom and democracy in the post-Soviet space. It will depend on the ability of these three countries to implement necessary reform stipulated by the agreement. Of course, all of us would have wished to sign up agreement under different, more comfortable circumstances. On the other hand, the external aggression faced by Ukraine gives another strong reason for this crucial step. By signing this agreement, Ukraine takes enormous commitment in terms of reform. But it is a document of joint ownership and joint responsibility. So, in the spirit of the political association, we also expect the European Union to put an effort to support our sovereign choice and protect Ukraine's independence and territorial integrity. But also, it will depend on Europe's solidarity with these three countries that paid a high price to be in Europe and with Europe. Will Europe be free or partly free? Will it have to worry about more war and annexation, or will be confident in future? These aren't idle questions. And the answer will depend on success or failure of the documents that we will sign today. Ukraine is determined to make it work. Our three countries embark on the way of painful but long overdue reform. Economic integration and political association with the European Union. That's our understanding of successful development. To make it work, we are ready to proceed with a ratification as soon as possible. We do hope ratification in EU capitals will ensure promptly. Dear friends, over the last month, Ukraine paid the highest possible price to make her European dreams come true. It must be worth something, for instance, to finally consider a simple statement of the part of the EU. Once Ukraine will be ready, it will be in. A statement that could cost the EU nothing, but would mean the world of my country. Therefore, in the context of today's signing, I would like to make a unilateral declaration. By signing the agreement with the European Union, Ukraine, as a European state, sharing common values of democracy and the rule of law, is underlying its sovereign choice in favor of future membership in EU in accordance with Article 49 of EU Treaty. The association agreement is considered by Ukraine as an instrument of comprehensive preparation to the achievement of this goal. The EU, more than just an exclusive club of rich nations. The EU is an idea, the right answer for Europe. And today, we all, EU and non-EU, make an important step to turn this idea to the reality. I thank all of you, dear presidents, dear head of the government, dear President of the Commission, dear President of the Council, dear commissioners, Commissioner Füle, Commissioner de Gucht, all the commissioners, because this is the result of our joint efforts, which reach today very important delivery to the people of Ukraine and to the people of European Union. Слава Європейському Союзу, слава Україні!
Glory to European Union, glory to Ukraine.
Я думаю, що немає.
I believe there's no need to translate. We translated. We were translating. And we would like to say that the applause of our government officials were here after the president said that these were symbolic applause. Yeah? Now the question. Sorry, they're signing.
Включіть звук, так.
Turn on this sound.
10 година 50.
10 o'clock 56, 10:56 in Kiev. The Barroso signing, all members. 28 presidents, heads of states. The president of Georgia. Georgia signs the association agreement together with us.
Може ще буквально
May parallel to that, I will say a few words. The Romanians, when they started their process of preparation to accession, parallel to what we were talking about, they also introduced the system of learning English and French for their civil servants, because that means that in no way anyone will translate for them. That is why we also need now, today, start thinking about teaching all our civil servants down to the level of the director of department so that they can communicate in English and French just like everyone else.
А безвізовий режим не стосується угоди про асоціацію, це окрема історія. Так, наступне буде ваше питання. Ну, зараз ми вже... Як? Чи давайте ви, напевно, поставите? Момент. Ну, тоді ви
Петро
коментуйте.
Олексійович підпише, а ми тоді вже.
Гаразд.
Let's not interrupt.
А Люба, можеш сказати, нові інфографіки ми готуємо тепер по виконанню угоди.
Це буквально фоном прокоментувати, щоб не заважати важливість
Ой, так,
моменту.
Так, важливість моменту.
Бачите, паралельно з
Ромпеєм.
головою. Це символічно.
Так. Порошенко. Браво! Нарешті це здійснилося. Вітаємо ще раз.
So, let's congratulate each other. Let's congratulate Ukraine, Europe, and the whole world. Because what is being done in Ukraine now, according to many intellectuals in the world, resolves or decides on the fate of the world. Your questions. We know that Ukrainians love foreign goods, and we can assume that after Ukraine cancels its duties for European goods, there will be more of them in the Ukrainian market. Can we believe that this will somehow harm our producer? And tell, please, how more accessible for Europeans Ukrainian goods will become. To continue on the question of TVI channel, first of all, we will reduce the cost of goods, but this will not be radical reduction. Mostly our duties for goods, consumer goods especially, varies within 10-15%. Only in some cases it's 20%. This reduction is not that significant, especially at the background of devaluation, on the background of the devaluation. Another thing will be replacement. There's a very interesting phenomenon related to how this replacement will happen, thanks to the agreement or not thanks to the agreement. That's an example of the pig fat. At this historic moment, we need to talk about pig fat. You know, there's such a great Moscow sausage, and most of Ukrainian producers say that Ukrainian pig fat is bad for it. Maybe they envisage the events that are taking place. Only Polish pig fat is good for this Moscow sausage. There was always a conflict between the processors and producers of Ukrainian pork and pig fat, and our processors were more interested in import than protection. But with the development of Ukrainian sector, quite naturally the import is being replaced. This agreement will just become an additional background for the process of transformation of trade. Plus to that, we need to remember that the products to which we got tariff quotas, we will liberalize the same volume of products. We're not opening these markets completely, like the poultry, the dairy products. We will preserve, for most of the import, we will preserve the same state of protection that we have. But in principle, the import, the number of import may grow because of the more attention from the producers of EU to our networks. And the more there will be Ukrainian products in EU, there will be more European products here. And that is strengthening the trade relations between private subjects. So I would like to agree with what you said, that we value import. I would put it in a different way. We value the high-quality products. Today, let's talk about import. Well, let's have domestic high-quality products. In the Soviet Union, there were some duties, but the import was, but some things were imported. The jeans were sold. They cost like 2 salaries of an engineer per month. Let's talk not just about producers, but about consumers. I want to have high quality, but accessible, affordable products. And for that, we need investments and reforms, you know?
Our officials quite often call us to support Ukrainian producers while they go abroad for rest, for vacations, etc. And I would like to make a remark here. We should understand how we assess the success in trade. Speaking about production sector, we speak about appliances, cars, etc. But these are sectors where $100 in price of the product could be decisive. That is, we have other sectors where we have bigger added value, and these sectors could position Ukraine in the global dimension as a country successful in trade. Tarasa, we should start not from the cars, we should start from potatoes and garlic. We should not be from Egypt or China. We should be Ukrainian. This requires good standards, but then there will be not so simple in terms of chemical qualities. My question to Mr. Yekhanurov and to Mr. Ogryska, this is not about trade. It is probably symbolic that we are here, that next to these buildings, people gave their lives to for the sake of signing this agreement and independence of Ukraine. Now people give their lives in Donbass, and Russia is not going to stop this hybrid war. And actually today, one of Russian officials mentioned that Poroshenko is a fascist, that we all are fascists, etc., etc. Mr. Yekhanurov, you are former Minister of Defense. Mr. Ogryska, you are former Minister of the your foreign minister. So how we can take this agreement in terms of security, which it promises to us? I would advise you to read Ivan Franko. Never try to to get security neither from your brothers nor from your enemies. Or read Taras Shevchenko, do not expect to get freedom because it was slapped by Tsar Mykola. But seriously speaking, we cannot get rid of Russian Federation, and today we have to make a decision about forced solution to the military conflict in the east, because otherwise this will mean the Transnistriaization of Donbass. Having the source of tension in the east, we won't be able to be efficient in our reforms. We will have several very heavy loads on our legs, which will prevent us from moving forward. I believe that we should put final dot in that terrorist war which is led by the Russian Federation. This is a tough decision, but I believe that the president will need to make it, and we have to finish this eastern Ukrainian stage of war and then further on think about Crimea. But nevertheless, there is still some hope, because there is such a thing as joint responsibility, and all the signatures put down under the document by European leaders and Ukraine shows that there is joint responsibility. So this gives us an element of hope, and I believe that we should make this some signs of hope into the big things, and sooner or later we will become members of the EU, and maybe we will speak about the membership to NATO. First of all, we have a war in Donbass, and although this war is not formalized internationally, and it only proves that international legal framework is outdated. Today's signing should mean that if Ukraine is in Europe, then it should be peace in Europe. And if Russia continues expansion with somebody else's hands, then in the future it will mean that the war in Ukraine today will start the war in Europe tomorrow. That is what we would prefer to see. Europeans are very wise people. They have huge experience. Why they are so wise? Because all the wars were in the territory of Ukraine. Ukraine paid the largest price, the hugest price in the Second World War. Now, many countries say that they had huge losses in the Second World War, and while this was Ukraine who actually had the biggest losses. We should speak not only that the losses of Ukraine I tried to be distorted, and even the victory in the Second World War is theft, but the origin of the state, the Kiev Rus, is deprived from us. I mentioned already that political agreement, which is an integral part of the association, requires political dialogue at the level of presidents. These are annual summits which require discussion of issues, international issues and political and security issues, and discussion of the territories and policies which are of joint interest. And we always discuss situation in Karabakh, in Balkan, in the Middle East. Unfortunately, from this point in time, we will discuss the events in Ukraine. And as the president mentioned in his speech, the association brings joint ownership and joint responsibility. This is an additional instrument for settling the situation. Thank you very much. It was very.
Скажіть, будь ласка, а можна на ефір Національної радіо там громадські радіо, знаєте, як громадське телебачення, є таке громадське
Тільки коли?
Ну, от якщо сьогодні
Сьогодні похорон ще раз, і друге 2 роки смерті Петра Германюка, міністра фінансів Америки. І от там все в мене